Hello, everyone, and welcome to NACDD's 2021 Annual Conference. I'm Donna Meltzer, CEO of NACDD, and I'm so glad that you're all here with us today. We are thrilled that all of you have been able to participate with us and join us for this virtual conference. While I wish that we could all be together in the same room, this virtual opportunity will have to do in order to keep us all safe and healthy. Our conference theme this year follows the theme that we had in March for our DD Awareness Month campaign, Moving Towards Change. We chose to stay with this theme because, boy, we've had a lot of change already this year. We have elected a new president and vice president of the United States. We have elected many new members of Congress. We have new leadership at our federal agencies, which is leading the way to new opportunities, and new innovations from DD councils across the country, including many that have been developed because of the ongoing pandemic of COVID-19. Throughout the next 4 days, you will hear some excellent presentations from speakers, and I hope that you will learn a great deal from our national experts and your colleagues from other DD councils. I hope that you will find our new conference platform helpful. On it, you will find more detailed information about our sessions and full bios from all of our speakers. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors as well: Optum, Pharma, United Healthcare, and Anthem. Your continued support and partnership with NACDD helps us to grow and evolve, and I am so proud of the work that we are all doing together to improve systems, provide better healthcare, employment opportunities, and access to community for people with IDD, their families, and their caregivers. I also want to thank all of the staff from NACDD who have worked so tirelessly to make this conference happen. Especially my thanks go to Robin Troutman, who has been behind the scenes working on all of this all summer long. I also want to thank the Annual Planning Conference Planning Committee for their work in putting this event together. The chair of our planning committee is Kirsten Murphy, and I would like to ask her to share a few brief words with you as well. Kirsten?
Thank you so much, Donna. Welcome, everybody, to our virtual conference. I'm Kirsten Murphy. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council, and I have the other honor of serving as your Member Services Committee Chair. Certainly the main event of member services is our annual conference. And I'd like to just thank by name each of our committee members. It takes a whole village to plan a conference that can capture the interest and participation of our wonderful, diverse network. So I would like to thank Eric Stoker from Utah, Alison White from Washington, D.C., Kayla Green from Wyoming, Eric Jacobson from Georgia, Mary Shaheen Bugard from Michigan, Melissa Schwartz from North Carolina, and the brilliant Jessica Pigeon, who we all miss so much now that she's doing a different job in Massachusetts. I would finally also want to say, again, a big warm thank you to Robin Troutman. If only Robin could kind of take up residence as my frontal lobe, it would be a much better place. She keeps us so organized. And finally, just again, welcome. And I think our new normal is change. So what an apt theme for our conference. Enjoy and think about all the wonderful changes that lie ahead for us. Thank you.
Kirsten, thank you so much for those very meaningful words. And you're right, it does take a village, and together, all of us have been able to produce this upcoming conference for you. I think it will be very meaningful, and we will all be learning together with one another and from one another. So thank you for all of your work, Kirsten, and leading the way along with all of those great committee members. We appreciate you. So this afternoon, we kick off with a very exciting session and conversation with some of our newest leaders from the administration, from the White House, and a panel of experts this afternoon. So our session this afternoon is called How the Biden-Harris Administration is Making Disability Rights a Priority. And we have two incredible presenters for the first half of our session this afternoon. one whom you know very well, and the other who is rather new to us, Ms. Emily Voorde from the White House. Emily Voorde was born in South Bend, Indiana. In utero, Emily was diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta. Since the age of 3, she has been using a wheelchair to navigate our, albeit often inaccessible, world. Emily graduated from the University of Notre Dame in 2015 with a degree in political science and minors in constitutional studies and business economics. At Notre Dame, Emily was an independent researcher with the Keough Dublin Summer Program, an intern in the office of Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and an intern in Senator Joe Donnelly's Washington, D.C. office. Following graduation from Notre Dame, Emily participated in the Alliance for Catholic Education's Teaching Fellows Program, a 2-year program blending full-time teaching in an under-resourced school with a Master's of Education graduate coursework at the University of Notre Dame. While with ACE, Emily taught in a 2nd grade self-contained classroom in Pascagoula, Mississippi. In 2017, she began a Master's of Public Policy and Education at Vanderbilt. While in Nashville, Emily worked full-time at Instruction Partners, an education nonprofit. Upon her graduation from Vanderbilt, Emily joined Mayor Pete Buttigieg's presidential campaign, Pete for America, as a travel manager. Her role quickly evolved as Chasten Buttigieg, Mayor Pete's husband, built out his own traveling road team. Emily spent the remainder of the campaign in direct support of Chasten and his body woman and trip director. Boy, we're sure you can share some great stories about all of this, Emily. Very exciting. Emily joined the University of Notre Dame's Sarah B. Accessibility Services team as their assistant director for education and outreach, supporting students with disabilities through the COVID-19 pandemic. In May, we all became very fortunate that Emily was appointed to a role in the White House Office of Public Engagement as an assistant director and the administration's liaison to the disability community. Emily, we are thrilled to have you join with us today, and we look forward to hearing how you and your team over at the White House are really working on your agenda. Please share with us what we need to know and how can we learn to engage more closely with you. So Emily, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Donna, for that warm welcome. It is so phenomenal to be here with you all today. As Donna mentioned, I have the unique honor. I'm so thrilled to sit in the Office of Public Engagement here at the White House. Solely tasked, my sole portfolio item is engaging with disabled Americans. And I think about that as one of my colleagues calls it, being the front doors to the White House. So ensuring that we, of course, are amplifying the administration's policy positions, but that we're also creating spaces and opportunities for Americans with disabilities' voices to be heard in the highest levels of government and beyond. So it's just an absolute honor to be here with you today. I want to talk to you a little bit about first my role and a little bit how I'm framing my approach and the administration's approach to disability. So as many of you know, the Office of Public Engagement is a historic office, was held by the likes of Rebecca Coakley, Maria Town, Claudia Gordon, some phenomenal folks in the space under the Obama administration. And then under the Trump administration was dissolved, but we're so thrilled to be back in action here under the Biden administration. And President Biden made good on his promise when he entered office, creating 2 separate roles. So mine here squarely in the Office of Public Engagement, as I mentioned, kind of serving as this front door to the White House. And then my colleague, Kim Nackstead, who serves as our first ever Director of Disability Policy over in the Domestic Policy Council. And so we're thrilled that we work closely in tandem, but that we have capacity, bandwidth, and space to be able to engage on this issue fully, not just as a tacked on policy or engagement afterthought, but ensuring that it's at the forefront of everything that we do here at the White House. As Donna mentioned, I was born with a very visible disability. I use a wheelchair, and it wasn't until kind of later, I would say in my late teens, early 20s, that I began to understand that there was a lot of privilege that came with that very visible disability, with my very visible disability. Of course, it comes with folks' preconceived notions and misunderstandings about what I can and can't do, but I've never had to question my identity in the community or that my very visible disability was carving out space. What I'm trying to do in our approach to disability here at the White House, and what I'm so thrilled to have the support of the administration behind, is really carving out kind of a big tent, a big coalition around disability, ensuring that, yes, of course, folks with very visible disabilities are represented, but also folks with ID and DD, folks with invisible illness, mental health, those navigating mental health, those navigating long COVID, our veterans, those with that are navigating addiction and eating disorders, really trying to create a broad coalition, a broad block of support in community and membership here in our approach to disability. And we're doing that because we know that we are a force to be reckoned with, right? And when folks begin to understand our community as more than just those, again, that come to mind very visibly when they think of disability, we are voices that can't continue to go unheard. So I'm really thrilled to be here leading this outreach work here in the Office of Public Engagement. I want to talk to you just a little bit about what we've done thus far here in the administration to support the disabled community, where we are right now, and where we have to go. And then, as Donna mentioned, just briefly touch on how you all, as leaders in your communities, can plug into this work. So the Biden administration started out with really strong provisions and supports for our community by way of the American Rescue Plan. So coming into this administration, knowing that so much had to be done to support our community and the newest members of our community as we continue to navigate COVID. So the American Rescue Plan provided states with billions in additional Medicaid funding for home and community-based services. The additional Medicaid funding will help expand access to home and community-based services for people with disabilities, as well as older adults. And this too, to ensure that our caregivers are fully compensated. We know that if caregivers are compensated well and compensated fairly, that translates into good, high quality, reliable care for folks in communities. The American Rescue Plan also provided direct support through a $3 billion investment in IDEA funding. And on July 1st, those $3 billion in funds were released to the Department of Education for direct support of students with disabilities. Again, particularly important as we prepare for the return to school here in a few weeks. Something else that we're really excited about coming out of just last week, our end of Disability Pride Month, we had a celebration in the Rose Garden that was attended by both the President and Madam Vice President. And during that celebration, the President announced some really exciting guidance, a package of guidance that came out of partnership between the Department of Health and Human Services and Departments of Justice, Education, and Labor. And this guidance provided clear directives for people who are navigating the effects of long COVID. We know that both folks that were disabled before COVID, before the pandemic, that then are now experiencing increased symptoms, as well as those who might have been considered non-disabled or able-bodied and then contracted COVID and are what we call kind of our long haulers. They're going to be the biggest influx of members to the disabled community since the HIV and AIDS crisis. So we know that so much has to be done to ensure that these folks are supported in our community and through the provision of services. So guidance explaining that COVID can be a disability under federal civil rights laws was released by the Department of HHS and Justice. That guidance clarified that long COVID can be considered a disability if it impacts one or more life activities, as we know is frequently the definition of disability. In this resource packet, we also talk about guidance that addresses the needs of children with long COVID as they prepare for the return to school. So the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights and the Office of Special Education and Rehab Services issued a resource document providing information about schools and public agencies' responsibilities for the provision of services and reasonable accommodations. So making sure that just like any other student with a disability, our public education is accessible and reasonable for our students. The Administration for Community Living at HHS released a guide to community-based resources that can help people that need assistance living in their own homes, living in their own communities. And then finally, the Office of Disability Employment Policy at the Department of Labor issued guidance on reasonable accommodation in the workplace. So for those with long-haul COVID that are returning to work, what does it look like to ask for accommodations in the workplace? So all of these resources being really incredible steps towards normalization of disability and support for disabled Americans. Again, on the cusp of this largest kind of influx to members of our community. So kind of that's where we've been. That's what here about 6 months in we're able to say we've accomplished. So where are we at now? So right here this week, as many of you know, the bipartisan infrastructure deal is in Congress. This bipartisan deal includes a great number of provisions that would support our community, both through physical accessibility as well as just the expansion of communicative and technology resources. So a few things that the bipartisan infrastructure deal includes. It includes $39 billion for the modernization of transit, upgrading aging infrastructure and making our train stations more accessible, $65 billion to ensure access to high-speed internet for all. We know, again, that this is so valuable, pulling back to the pandemic piece. As students and those in the workforce navigate either remote schooling or remote work, ensuring that they have high-quality access, reliable access to internet. It includes $73 billion for clean energy, ensuring disabled Americans have life-sustaining, reliable power, $21 billion for environmental remediation of harmful pollution, ensuring that we are able to breathe clean air and keep our lungs healthy. And then finally, replacement of thousands of traditional school buses with clean, again, respiratory-friendly alternatives. So that package is in Congress right now. And again, we're so thrilled to see the supports that it would provide for our community. And finally, I just want to talk about kind of where we're going. As you know, the president has been consistent in his Building Back Better agenda in ways that he really wants to commit to continued support of the disabled community. Of course, through traditional medical models and provisions, but also ensuring that people with disabilities are able to fulfill the ideals of the Americans with Disability Act, living independently, being sufficient economically. These are kind of included in his guiding stars of some of the provisions in the Build Back Better agenda. So one of those is going to be ensuring that we have paid leave to support all families. So the president's Build Back Better agenda proposes a guarantee of 12 weeks of paid parental, family, and personal illness or safe leave, and ensures that workers get 3 days of bereavement leave per year starting in year 1. Addressing teacher shortages through the development of special education teachers, so ensuring that we're investing in high quality personnel preparation under IDEA. Expansion of inclusive, accessible preschool through the BBB agenda, calls for a national partnership with states to offer free, high quality, inclusive, accessible schooling for our youngest students. Phasing out of the sub-minimum wage, so ensuring that that the sub-minimum wage provision in Section 14C is phased out, in proposing instead investments to expand accessible, competitive, integrated employment. And then finally, what's on so many folks' minds is just ensuring that full investment of $400 billion in our care economy, and our home and community-based services is seen out, and that's kept in the Build Back Better agenda. So my kind of last piece here is, I know I just kind of rambled off a bunch of really phenomenal priorities and initiatives that are coming out of the White House. But I just want to talk to you briefly here before I cede my time about anecdotally the true commitment, again, to inclusion, accessibility, and really just affirmation that I've seen out of the White House. We had a really phenomenal roundtable a few weeks back with the Vice President and members of the disabled community to talk about voting access for those with disabilities. And again, not just kind of traditional physical polling place access, but ways in which guardianship, the inability to sign one's signature, ID laws, accommodations for those that were blind or deaf or hard of hearing, all these barriers to the vote. And this meeting came about after the Vice President herself made a request to convene this group. Our meeting was about an hour long, which I'm told is a large chunk of time to set aside in the Vice President's schedule. And just seeing the ways in which she was listening intently, taking copious notes, and then after, followed up on do-outs with her team to ensure that they were following up on the information and the questions that were asked. It's just a really phenomenal witness to the fact that disability is back here in the White House, and that this is an affirming, inclusive place. Again, it shows just this sense of belonging and purpose in place for members of our community, regardless of their diagnosis. So to Donna's point, and then I'll close out here, what is it that you all can do to support? I know, in the disabled community, we do this so well, but just keep making noise, keep making good noise around the incredible, invaluable nature of, for example, this is investment in home and community-based service funding. Changing hearts and minds begins with stories at the grassroots level, stories of folks whose lives are changed by the implications of these policy decisions in Washington. So please continue to be leaders in this space. I know folks on this call do that so well, and just know how grateful we are for everything that you're doing to continue organizing in your communities. With that, I'll turn it back over to Donna.
So much. It is just such a pleasure to have you with us, to have this breath of fresh air. And as you indicated, for the last 4 years, we did not have somebody at the White House who was there specifically to protect the rights and look at the needs of people with disabilities. So we are thrilled to have partners again, not just from the president and the vice president, but in the public liaison office, public engagement. You have already welcomed all of us and made us feel so much like there's a partnership once again with the White House, and we're so excited to have you there. And thank you for your remarks. As I begin to introduce our next speaker, who many of you know so well, I just want to remind folks that we should have a little bit of time for Q&A after Alison, so please use the chat function and indicate in there if you have a question either for Emily or Alison, and we'll do our best to get to your questions after Alison's presentation. So Alison Barkoff, many of you know, she is certainly a familiar face and a dear friend of NACDD's. Alison was sworn into office as the principal Deputy Administrator on January 20th, 2021. And that was honestly quite significant. That was the day of inauguration. And to have Alison there and working from her very first moment was just so instrumental for all of us. She is currently serving also as the Acting Administrator and Assistant Secretary for Aging. So she's a busy woman wearing lots of different hats. In her capacity, she provides executive direction, leadership, guidance, and coordination for the Administration for Community Living Programs nationwide and advises the HHS Secretary on issues affecting individuals with disabilities and older adults. Ms. Barkoff comes to ACL from the Center for Public Representation, CPR, where she served as Director of Advocacy. In that position, she led policy advocacy with federal agencies and Congress and legal advocacy nationally to advance community living and inclusion, including in the areas of healthcare, Medicaid, home and community-based services, employment, housing, and education. She led and participated in numerous coalitions with disability and aging organizations, including as co-chair of the Long-Term Services and Supports Task Force of the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, CCD. She has testified before Congress and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights on Disability Rights and was appointed to serve on the Federal Advisory Committee for Competitive Integrated Employment of People with Disabilities. She previously served as Director of Advocacy at the Bascom Center for Mental Health Law, where she worked on a range of disability, healthcare, education, and civil rights issues. In earlier government roles, she served as Special Counsel for Olmstead Enforcement in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, leading efforts to enforce the rights of people with disabilities to live, work, and fully participate in their communities. Alison has had too many great positions for me to read and share all of them with you. Her full bio is on our website platform. I do want to mention, though, something that's very important about Alison, which is that she is a sibling to an adult brother with IDD, who many of us know, Evan Nodben, who has been very engaged with the Georgia DD Council. And we know that all of Alison's passion really is very personal to her and comes from being a very engaged sibling and family member. Alison, it's always our pleasure to work with you. We're so thrilled that you are in this position with ACL, and we look forward to hearing your remarks. The floor is yours.
Great. Donna, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's so wonderful to join all of you and to share the stage with Emily. As Donna mentioned, I was privileged to have joined ACL on Inauguration Day, and truly the mission of ACL, supporting opportunities for community living for all, has been my own life's mission. As Donna mentioned, I've been involved in issues around advocacy and community living for my entire life and really started this work 40 years ago, joining the disability community at a time where my family was told, like so many others, that the only place for Evan was in an institution. And advocating alongside Evan and other families and advocates across the country, I've been part of really developing the community service system that helps people with disabilities live, work, and fully participate in their communities and make choices for themselves about the lives they want to live. And as a result, 40 years later, Evan lives in his own apartment with a roommate of his choice, has a great job where he's a valued employee, has a girlfriend and an active social life, and is an advocate in his own right, including, as Donna mentioned, as a member of the executive committee of the Georgia Council on Developmental Disabilities. My work has not only been through a policy lens, but very much through a civil rights lens. And I've been part of developing and implementing civil rights laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, and truly bring to this work knowing that the promise of the ADA cannot be fulfilled until we make sure people have the supports they need and the opportunities to make choices to live the life that they want. I've been really, really privileged to work with so many DD councils over the years, and I'm really glad to be here at the conference. I think I've been at so many over the last few years. I wish I could give hugs to so many friends and colleagues, and I feel really, really privileged to be working with you in my new role. I really want to start by thanking all of you. I've really been along your side over the entire pandemic, seeing the incredible work that you've been doing on the ground, both alongside as a colleague and collaborator as we were working together through the beginning of the pandemic, and over the last 7 months as I'm inside of ACL. I truly know firsthand the life-saving work that you've been doing. DD councils have been helping shape state policies. I've seen so many of you working with state Medicaid and DD agencies around emergency authorities to expand services and support caregivers. I've seen the relationships that y'all have built with state and local public health agencies, the incredible work that you've been doing to educate people with IDD and their families about COVID precautions, and now truly the incredible work you're doing to educate people about vaccines and ensure access for all. And I know that so many of you have been doing this like the rest of us, while managing through the pandemic yourself, balancing family and work and responsibilities and being isolated from coworkers and friends. So truly, as the acting ACL administrator, as a family member, and as a colleague, I really want to say thank you. I want to pivot and just talk about some priorities of the current administration and of ACL, and really highlight the ways that our networks, including the DD councils, have been so key. When I joined the administration on January 20th, COVID-19 truly was the priority for ACL and the administration. We had seen at that point almost a year of people with disabilities being impacted in every single way, being more at risk for infection and death, to having issues with accessing healthcare and vaccines, to the damaging effects of social isolation. And it was pretty thrilling after a year, alongside so many of you, feeling like our issues and our community was so invisible to the response from the administration and from Congress, to see within the first 2 days of the administration a national strategy for COVID and a set of executive orders that put significant focus on the issues that people with disabilities were facing, from vaccines to testing to protecting the caregiving workforce, equity, risk in congregate settings, and more. And it truly has been an all-of-government effort, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, working truly to save lives, with the White House, with the HHS COVID task force, and with the Equity Task Force and CDC, to make sure that the unique needs of people with disabilities are considered in every single thing that we do. From early in January, we started focusing our energies on vaccine access. And I know that all of you and NACDD have played such a critical role on this. By then, the science was clear. People with intellectual and developmental disabilities, people like Evan, were particularly at risk and had incredibly high rates of death if infected by COVID. So many of you led the charge early on to advocate that people with disabilities and their caregivers, whether it was paid support or family caregivers, needed to be prioritized. And once the capacity of vaccines caught up to the demand, we knew we had to turn to outreach, to education, and to addressing those barriers. And because of the incredible work that you are already doing, we were able to advocate and get $100 million of funding from CDC, the first ever. We have never received funding from another federal agency to go out to our networks to fund the disability and aging networks on the ground to address barriers in registering people, providing transportation, in-person supports at vaccine sites, helping identify people who need in-home vaccinations, and so much of the work that you're doing now, addressing vaccine hesitancy. It's been so incredible. Every day I hear the stories of the work coming out of our networks, the partnerships that's happening on the ground, and it's been so complementary with the GOTV campaign led by NACDD, and I really, truly want to thank you. Everything you're doing is saving lives. We were also able to use that funding from the CDC for the first time ever to set up a national disability hotline, the Disability Information and Assistance Line, or DIAL, to help people with disabilities obtain vaccinations and also connect with services and supports. And I really want to thank NACDD for your assistance and partnership in getting this line up and going. In just the few weeks it's been up, we've gotten well over 1,000 calls, and there is truly a need for these supports. Vaccine access is not just a moral imperative, it is a legal imperative. And to that end, we've been working alongside our partners at HHS's Office for Civil Rights to make sure that public entities know their legal obligations, but also know that our networks are there to help them meet them. So earlier this spring, we put out a package of resources together with HHS's Office for Civil Rights, showing both the legal obligations and the ways our networks are helping state and local government meet those. And as Emily mentioned, our latest collaboration around COVID has been about long COVID. We've heard from the community for months since I've been here, we need more information. What is the government doing? And in addition to the package pieces that Emily mentioned around what are the legal protections under laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act, the special education laws, employment laws in the workplace, we thought it was critical that people who may not be familiar with disability services, people who may not even identify as being disabled, know the reach of ACL's disability and aging networks and how to connect with them. So hopefully everybody saw that resource and is aware that even later today, we are having a webinar to walk people through that. COVID-19 absolutely has laid bare the risks of institutional and congregate settings, something that the DD councils knew far before COVID-19. But COVID-19, with 1/3 of the deaths occurring in nursing homes and other institutional settings, with less than 5% of the population in those settings. People with disabilities lost access to services and informal supports, and we saw that so many families had to take on caregiving responsibilities, many even having to leave the workforce to make up for those lost services. And the caregiving workforce crisis that existed before COVID, that we've been working on for so long, with just barely chipping away at the problem, was incredibly exacerbated, particularly when we saw that people who provided direct services were not treated as the essential workers that they are. Early on, I know the DD councils played such a crucial role in getting things like basic PPE to direct care workers across their states. The one silver lining that's come out of COVID is that it has created a national urgency, like I think none of us who have been doing this work for decades have ever seen. And to have behind us an administration that has centered the caregiving infrastructure as a key piece of our recovery from COVID. As Emily mentioned, Congress, working closely with the administration, finally, after a year of advocacy from our community, saw the dire need for funding to help people with disabilities and older adults remain in the community and out of institutions. And because of the American Rescue Plan, there's now a $12.7 billion B. We're not used to talking about billion-dollar increases in our community, but $12.7 billion through a 10% federal match increase that was passed as part of the American Rescue Plan. And I know so many of you have been working on the state level as your states are developing their spending plans for this additional funding to do incredibly important priorities like expanding services, meeting the needs of people who've been sitting on wait lists, supporting and strengthening the direct workforce, and supporting family caregivers. Again, thank you for your advocacy and for the difference that you're making in the states. President Biden has been clear that this funding is just a down payment to what we truly need to address the caregiving infrastructure in the country. And again, as Emily mentioned, the American Jobs Plan, which is now part of the bigger Build Back Better plan, included a proposed $400 billion investment in community systems, the direct care workforce, and family caregivers, and proposes to permanently reauthorize the Money Follows the Person program. I want to touch on family caregiving because I know it's something that the DD councils have played such a crucial role in, and ACL has a number of programs. In fact, we are the federal agency that really has most of the government's programs that support family caregivers. We know because of insufficient formal supports, caregivers are the ones who end up really holding the lives of people with disabilities together, filling in those gaps. And there's an approximate $500 billion annually in unpaid caregiving. ACL is charged with implementing the Raise Family Caregiver Act, and we have an advisory council that's charged with developing a national strategy on family caregiving. I can't think of a more important and timely period of time for us to be working in developing this national strategy, which we will be shortly submitting to Congress, and really identifying what are the key barriers and what are some of the key strategies. We also support a number of direct programs like the Lifespan Respite Program and a number of other programs to support family caregivers. And we have a couple other programs. We are in the process of awarding funding to develop a community of practice designed to build capacity across states' aging and disability networks to support individuals with IDD and their families as they age. As the lifespan of people with IDD have significantly increased, we really need to build those connections, and how do we plan as caregivers age? The direct care workforce is another key priority for ACL. We're working across the government, across the federal government, with partners at CMS and the Department of Labor to strengthen this workforce. We know that we have to increase pay and benefits to direct support professionals. We have to have better opportunities for career ladders and training. And we know that self-direction and expanding it is one key strategy to increasing the available workforce. Again, the funding in the American Rescue Plan is crucial to helping strengthen the workforce now. And we were really thrilled to see not only the Better Care, Better Jobs Act, which is a piece of President Biden's caregiving infrastructure, but a bill that was introduced in the Senate to have $1 billion of grant funding that would go through ACL to work with states and other entities to develop infrastructure and innovations to support the direct care workforce. We also have just been wrapping up our DSP prize competition, where we are awarding innovative business models that can help stabilize and expand the DSP workforce. We just announced our first round of winners, and we are really excited that pretty soon we will be focusing on our second round. This really is about strategies that we can bring to scale. I want to touch on just a couple other areas where we are working on home and community-based services. Again, so many of you have been working with your states around Money Follows the Person, and because of your advocacy, and it was a slog, the last 3.5 years together with so many short-term reauthorizations, but finally at the end of the year, we had a multiple-year expansion of MFP, and actually the criteria and eligible populations have been expanded. And one thing that we're focusing on in ACL as we're bringing new states on, as we're looking to the fall for expanding MFP programs, is making the connection with affordable, accessible, integrated housing. We know that that's a huge barrier for people with disabilities and a reason that many people remain stuck in institutions. And starting earlier this spring, we've launched a collaboration between ACL, CMS, and partners at HUD to really identify resources and bring together our networks, local public housing authorities, state Medicaid agencies, and MFP programs, so we can really leverage the resources that are out there and make sure that housing is not the barrier that keeps people in institutions. Protecting people from abuse and neglect is another place where we work closely with the DD councils, and y'all have been such leaders in our Living Well projects that are really focusing on how can we balance the need as we have more people in the community to make sure that we have strong community monitoring systems in place, but in a way that respects people's self-determination and dignity of risk. We've learned a lot from those programs, and really hope as we're expanding HCBS, as we're supporting people with more complex needs in the community, we can really take to scale some of the lessons learned. Of course, community living is not possible if people aren't making choices for themselves. And that's another place where ACL has worked so closely with the DD councils on alternatives to guardianship. We have, for quite a while, had a National Resource Center on supported decision making, and we've really pivoted and launched in the last year a TA center that's really focused on transition age youth and breaking that school to guardianship pipeline that we know so many of you have been working on. When we talk about community living, it's not just about where you lay your head. It's about what you do during the day. And employment has been such a key priority for ACL, for the DD councils, and it's thrilling to see that we have an administration who has taken such a strong stand on the fact that people with disabilities can and should be able to work, and be able to work at fair and equal pay. As Emily mentioned, the President Biden's American Jobs Plan recognizes the need for investment in employment opportunities for people with disabilities. From day one, our president has called for an end to the unfair, outdated, and discriminatory pay of sub-minimum wages to people with disabilities. And we know that it can't only be about what we take away. It has to be about the build, which is why he's called for an investment in opportunities for competitive integrated employment. The Congress has reintroduced the Transformation to Competitive Employment Act, which would support states and providers in their transformation as they end sub-minimum wages and pivot from sheltered workshops to employment and other integrated day services. And as we've been advocating, we've seen over the last 2 years, we've gone from one single state to nearly a dozen that themselves have taken employment first to a true legal level by phasing out sub-minimum wages and investing in competitive integrated employment. In ACL, we are continuing our investments around employment. I hope people were able to see the great work that we did with a number of our longitudinal grantees and putting out a book about what 30 years of community living for people with IDD looks like. And the one place where we have so much work to do is employment. It highlights that while 60% of people with IDD would like to be working in a paid job alongside people without disabilities, only 20% of people with IDD are. And so we have a ways to go still. And that's why we are working with our federal partners at the Department of Labor, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, and other federal partners to really leverage some of the funding that exists there. We also just recently announced a funding opportunity for community collaborations for employment programs that would help bring together in local communities our DD Act partners. This is an opportunity for $1.6 million in funding to plan at the local level, and more details at acl.gov. And hopefully many of you have also been involved in our recent Disability Employment Technical Assistance Center, where we've brought together all of our networks to really talk about ways that we can innovate and collaborate, and that ACL can support you in advancing competitive integrated employment. Finally, I just want to touch on a theme that cuts across all of our work, which is equity. From day one, the Biden-Harris administration has directed all federal agencies to center equity in everything that we do. And we are looking at racial justice through an intersectional lens by looking at barriers that people with disabilities face if they are multiply marginalized. People with disabilities face different barriers if they are also a person of color, LGBTQ, may not speak English as a first language, live in a rural area, or may face a range of barriers. We're really trying to bring an intentional equity lens to everything that we do in our programs, with our networks, and the policies that we have around people with disabilities. But we also play a really important role in making sure that all of HHS and the federal government brings an intersectional lens that considers the needs of people with disabilities and older adults as we're looking at other populations. So we're making sure, particularly in HHS, as we're looking at health disparities, that the health disparities include people with disabilities. And we're really interested in going forward, hearing from you and lifting up the work that you are doing throughout the DD councils and really help replicating that work. Finally, I'll just end by saying that partnership is absolutely key to our success. And, you know, ACL, I say we're small but we're mighty because of who we work with and really what we can bring to the table in those partnerships. No one agency or even one department owns disability, and disability cannot be done well if we are not at the table with every agency that touches on access to services and housing and education and employment and transportation. And it's been thrilling to have leaders like Emily and Kim Knoxted at the Domestic Policy Council to help bring us together on policy. But we also know that we need partnership at the network level, and so many DD councils are so good at doing that, working together at the state level with your other DD Act partners, with SILs, and collaborations with the aging networks. So I'll just close by saying we truly have an unprecedented opportunity before us. For those of us who have been doing this a long time, I don't even think we could have imagined the opportunities that we have. But we are going to have to work together to achieve these goals. As Emily said, our voices need to be loud. We need to keep moving along. And it's time for us to think big and bold and to work together. And I'm thrilled to be a partner in my new role at ACL. And really, again, want to thank you for all your partnership and for everything that you do. So with that, I'll turn it back to Donna for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alison. Wow, every time you speak, I get so excited. I think about all of these great things that are going on over at ACL, and of course, Emily, hearing about how all of this is connecting now through the White House in a way that we haven't seen maybe never before at this level. It's also, it's energizing, it's exciting, it's also a little exhausting, but, this is inspiring. So thank you for inspiring us to think about what else we need to do and how we can do it better, how we can do it intersectionally, how we can be working and lifting each other up as we work in collaboration. I see that there is a question. Questions are starting to come in the chat. The first one comes from somebody who at least you, Alison, know well, Nicole LeBlanc, asks, do you think this pandemic will lead to an SSDI expansion, just like SSDI came out in the 1950s during polio? Either of you can answer.
And let me start by jumping in, and Emily can add. What I can say is our community has been so amazing, especially as people are working with Congress and lifting up the incredible barriers that we have in SSI and SSDI. The fact that basically people have to continue to live in poverty. I know I want to give a shout out to Nicole, because Nicole, this has been an issue I know you have worked so hard on. And so what I'll say is, I think there are so many things that need to be changed out there, and it is being lifted up in a way that I think we haven't seen before. What makes it into this specific reconciliation package is, I think we are all waiting with bated breath. But I think that y'all, and I will give it to our community and to people like Nicole, have really been educating policy makers about the barriers that our benefit systems create, including the cliffs that we have. We can't be saying we want people with disabilities to work and also have a healthcare system that's tied with poverty, a benefit system that's tied with incredibly low income and asset limits. So I hope so is the answer that I have for Nicole, and keep up y'all's awesome work.
Thank you. Emily, did you want to share anything?
I was just going to say, I echo Alison wholeheartedly. I think I'll just keep it at, if there was ever a time, if there was ever an opportunity, if there was ever a window, I think that we are darn close to it. So please, yes, I cannot stress enough how much you all making noise on the ground is what is going to drive this change. So I'll pile on to Alison there and say I hope.
Thank you. So there's a question in the chat from, I hope I pronounced your name right, Alicia Murray, who says she identifies as saying she's lives with multiple disabilities, as do many other people. She says, in Oklahoma, I am working on putting together a re-entry to school workforce community-based nonprofit. Since once you sustain a TBI, you will acquire additional disabilities over time, if not immediately. What would be the best way to reach out to disability groups, connect, and address issues? And I think, Alison, this might be for you, because clearly TBI is a big part of the body of work that's done at ACL. So she says the only thing she can think of is a panel of multicultural group of various TBI survivors, but maybe you have some other thoughts you'd like to share.
Sure. So I'd welcome the opportunity, and Donna, you can make sure to connect us. We actually in ACL have a resource center on traumatic brain injury. There's actually some TBI work that's also done through the PNA network. And so there are some existing networks out there. It sounds like from the question, really looking through an intersectional lens. And I think that's really important to find people with TBI who also represent diverse communities. I'm very happy to put you in touch with our TBI Center to talk about ways that you might be able to collaborate. Again, I'll just say one thing I really bring to this work that I think is so important is, we really need to break down the silos between disabilities. As someone who personally comes from the IDD community, but has spent so much time working in organizations that focus on people with mental health disabilities or TBI or physical disabilities. That's something that we're really trying to push in ACL. And, we've even partnered with SAMHSA because, our lanes around people with mental health disabilities intersect. So I think that's a really important point, and really would even encourage DD councils. I know when TBI onset may impact whether it's technically considered a developmental disability, but there are many issues that cut across our networks, and we really need to identify areas where we can collaborate. So hope that's helpful.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question, and there's still time, folks, if anybody wants to add another question into the chat. We have a few more minutes, but this is very exciting that the two of you are here together and working so collaboratively. Can you walk us through just a little bit for our audience to better understand how the White House and ACL collaborate together? So many of the issues that you have both talked about today as priority items come under both jurisdictions. So kind of how does this work? Is it top down, bottom up, side by side? And within that structure, how do you best want to work with our networks of not just DD councils, but the broader disability community? How can we help influence and push on those most important things.
Emily, you want to start, or you want me to start?
Yeah, no, I'll kick us off. So as somebody that is relatively new to this administration appointee space, it's been really exciting to see the ways that not only, for example, Kim and I can partner here over in the White House, but with our interagency partners, across the administration. We have a really robust senior leadership group that meets regularly to talk about the work that we're all doing in our agencies, as well as updates or opportunities for collaboration. We also just really I think stay in pretty consistent communication and are consistently looking for ways to partner and to supplement one another's work. So I think that we are, if I can say, I think we're pretty good at knowing kind of what is in each other's wheelhouse, what projects we're working on, what we're pushing for, where our networks do and don't intersect, and just finding creative ways to partner and really work together to make sure we're not working harder, we're just working smarter. The webinar that Alison alluded to that is later on this afternoon on long COVID, that's a great example. Right, after hearing so many in our community excited about the long COVID guidance that was put out, we put together kind of a group of facilitators who have led at this on these pieces at the agency level to come together to present this afternoon on the resources. So really leaning into everybody's individual networks and expertise, again, to ensure that we are being most efficient in our work and that our reach is as wide as possible.
And I'll just add to what Emily said, kind of on the policy front. It's this is, I think, now my third time back in and out in government, and I will say this is the most collaborative White House that I've really had an experience with. By early February, and again, having Kim in the position at DPC has made all the difference. There already was an interagency working group of leadership from all of the agencies that was brought together for disability working group. And we pretty quickly broke into kind of smaller working groups on specific issues, which is where a lot of these joint policy documents came out of. We had a COVID team. We have an LTSS team where we're working on issues that inform what's in the president's caregiver infrastructure plan. We have an employment working group. We have a children's working group. And so, from having been in the government before, I have to keep reminding myself, it takes usually like a year and a half to even get people in a room together. And we did it within weeks. Was pretty amazing. There are, outside of the disability space, a number of other DPC-led working groups where disability has been brought in. So ACL, for example, is part of a working group that is focused on telehealth. There's one about children in general. There's one on just a whole range of issues. I feel like they keep showing up on my, evictions. That was another one that we recently joined, the evictions one, because we were like, hey, we have networks on the ground, people with disabilities and older adults may be really impacted by this. How can we be a player here? So I think we've really found a great way to work together. And I want to give credit to the White House in really seeing the agencies as partners and in every circumstance identifying what are the things that we can do within our existing authorities, how do we move the agenda forward, and then what are the places where the White House, either through executive actions or working with Congress, can move the agenda forward. But it's been pretty amazing, and I'd encourage people to look at the fact sheet that came out last Monday for the 31st anniversary of the ADA. The things that are on there, I would have thought that would be like a 2 years in kind of fact sheet, not 6 months in the middle of a pandemic, but we have already achieved things, and it's pretty amazing.
Thank you both for that. So one other question here from Liz Smithson, excuse me. She's concerned about children with complex medical conditions and that it is difficult for them to access out-of-state medical care. She says often people with disabilities have conditions that are rare and they need access to specific doctors that might not be in their state. This has been an extremely difficult process through our state Medicaid, and other states are struggling with this as well. How can we create or change our current system to allow for easier access to healthcare across the nation for people with disabilities? Big and excellent question.
Yeah, well, I'll start with the fact that, the fact that Medicaid isn't portable is just a huge barrier. And I know DD count, whether it's because a family is moving, a military family, so we have kind of a baseline barrier that people are stuck where they are. I do think, and I'd be happy actually to connect with the person who asked this question. I know CMS really is looking at access for kids, including kids with complex disabilities. And, depending on some of the different rules and different programs, including, whether they're on Medicaid and there's EPSDT, the early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment, the entitlements that are specific to kids on Medicaid. There are some set of access rules, but I know there are huge barriers. So I am very happy if there's a specific question to bring this to CMS, see what kind of existing guidance there is. And I know that our secretary is always looking for what are the ways that we can address issues, and access to care is huge. We actually have a children's working group, and I'd love to actually bring this issue to our White House working group on kids if this is something that's really an across the board issue. So happy to get more information and take some of that back.
Thank you. Emily, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that falls so squarely in Allison's camp, but no, you don't need me to tell you this, but you are certainly not alone in that being an issue and a barrier to high quality care. Something I hear about and have personally experienced as someone with complex medical needs as well. So no, all I can say is that Alison hasn't said is know that this administration is here to listen and understands that is something that needs to be addressed. So would certainly take Alison up on her offer to connect further.
Great, thank you. All right, one final question that's come in, and then we will end this portion of our segment this afternoon. Do you think telehealth will continue post-COVID? Is there any movement to incentivize doctor house calls like in the 1930s to deal with decline in preventive care and barriers due to COVID, et cetera?
So why don't I start and Emily can add in. As I mentioned, there really is a lot of intentionality being put into telehealth. It increased access in lots of ways, but we are also, with this equity lens, really thinking about both accessibility barriers like the lack of broadband access, but just last week, ACL, together with HHS's Office for Civil Rights, presented to our interagency task force about the barriers that people face in terms of accessibility for people with disabilities. And so I think we're very much trying to develop policies that identify what are the services that increase access. How do we address some of those barriers? Are there certain services where it's not really evidence-based to be doing telehealth? And, in terms of thinking differently about, doctor visits, in-home supports, we've seen a lot of that happening on the ground during COVID. And so I think we really are looking at what are the ways that get people the care they need most effectively, especially in hard to reach and underserved communities. So that really is a guiding lens. I do think telehealth will be way expanded beyond where it was before, but I think we need to do it with intentionality and ensuring that everyone can benefit from that expansion.
And I'll just close by saying, right, this theme keeps coming up. We keep coming back to this theme of this is such an opportunity, a moment of opportunity. We've kind of deconstructed so much of the normal of our systems and our structures with COVID. And to Alison's point earlier, I think the silver lining is that we have a real opportunity to build back better, not to use that as too much of a platitude, but to really take a good hard look at how we are coming out of this pandemic, and what the other side looks like, how we can rebuild systems and structures to really be in service and accessible and inclusive to all. I think we had to innovate in a lot of new ways, both personally and as a system and structure, and there's been a lot of learnings from those, and in seeing ways that our community has flexed and shined and said, this is what we've been fighting for all along, and now that it's here, let's make sure it stays. So, but I think we have an immense opportunity here in the next several months, next several years of this administration, to really ensure that those structures are here to stay. And again, I think we're fortunate that we have the buy-in of the administration on that.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much for an amazing conversation here today. And Emily, I do want to let you know, I've also seen some chat here that I get to see that not everybody else gets to see, from some of our self-advocates who are admiring of, where you have gotten to in your career. I mean, you're at the White House. Any advice to any of our younger advocates who are people with disabilities who would love to someday be in positions like both of you? How do we help get them there? Let's close with that thought.
Yeah, I heard it once said, and I wish that I knew who to attribute this to, and I'll have to go back. But the revolution occurs, I'm sorry, in kind of whatever space you're in, right? So I started in education, but maybe it's starting in healthcare, maybe it's starting in a trade, maybe it's starting in banking or business or commerce, whatever it may be. But just your presence as someone maybe that doesn't have a visible disability by any means, but is proud of their disability, that wears that on their sleeve. That is so valuable. And sharing in your experience, being vulnerable, being an advocate, I think that really changes hearts and minds, right? We're on kind of the precipice, I think, of folks beginning to better understand members of the disabled community as being integral, vital parts of a larger community. And we're certainly standing on the shoulders of so many folks in our DD councils that have helped create that culture change. But I would just say, whether you're interested in being in work, kind of in whatever sector it may be, just never be ashamed to bring this piece of your identity with you into whatever space it may be. Don't at all by any means feel as if you're pigeonholed, like you have to be the voice of this community or of your diagnosis or of your experience. But know that there is so much power in the creativity, in the ingenuity, in the advocacy that you bring with you into any room. So I am more than happy to connect with folks that are interested in getting involved in this work. But never, I'll just end with saying, never doubt that there's immense power in your lived experience to move mountains in whatever sector, whatever industry it may be.
Thank you so much for that. Alison, Emily, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy days. We're grateful to have you with us, for sharing so much information with us, and thrilled to be partners with all of you. So thank you for your time. To all of our attendees, we're going to take a quick 10-minute or so break. Please rejoin us at 3:30. We have an amazing panel of advocacy leaders in our DD and beyond community. And we're going to be reflecting on some of the things that Alison and Emily shared with us today. So please feel free to take a quick break, and we'll see you back here very shortly. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody really enjoyed that session we just had with Emily Voorde and Alison Barkoff. I know I certainly learned a lot, and I'm just feeling like so much has happened over the last 6 months when this administration began its work back in January. And here we are. It is now the beginning of August, so we have a lot to reflect on. And to do that today, I have brought in an extraordinary panel of wonderful advocates who are all CEOs of national disability organizations. And I am going to quickly introduce them and ask each one of them to join in. So first we have John Cheetah with the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. Welcome, John. I am not seeing John's face. I'm just seeing John's name tag there. So we might need to fix that. Yep. Perfect. Julia Bascom with the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. Welcome, Julia. We've got Mike.
Hello.
Hello. We've got Mike Brujali with TASH.
Hey everybody, good to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. We're so happy to have you. Angela Williams with Easterseals.
Good afternoon.
There's Angela. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. And last but certainly not least, Curt Decker with the National Disability Rights Network.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So we just need to get John back in here. But thank you all for joining me today. I know most of you were on, I think, listening to the conversation that we just had with Alison and with Emily. So we look forward to hearing some of your thoughts. Where I'd like to begin is to ask each of you one at a time to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about you, how long you've been with your national organization, and maybe just a little something about you that we might not know. For example, it's summer. Summer to me makes me think about ice cream. Maybe you have a favorite ice cream flavor. Maybe you want to share where you hope to go on vacation later this month, or something that will help us to get to know you each a little bit. So let me begin with Julia. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name is Julia Bascom. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the executive director of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, or ASAN. We're a national disability rights organization run by and for autistic adults and people with other similar developmental disabilities. I've been with ASAN for 10 years now, which I didn't realize until I did the math a couple weeks ago. And I've been in my current role for 5 years. And before that, I was actually on the DD Council back home in my home state of New Hampshire. So it's really great to be back with everyone at NACDD.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julia. Mike, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Brujali. I'm the executive director of TASH. We advance equity, opportunity, and inclusion for people with disabilities, including those with the most significant support needs. We do that in the areas of education, employment, and community living through advocacy, research, and practice. This is our new mission statement, just hot off the presses about 4 weeks ago. We have a diverse membership of educators, researchers, self-advocates, family members, and service providers. Our basic, our mantra really is full inclusion for all people with disabilities. And I know that we have a common cause with the DD councils. I had the privilege and pleasure of working for NACDD during the first 4 years, or the middle 4 years of the Obama administration. And it's good to be with old friends and to make new acquaintances. And thank you, Donna and Robin and the whole team at NACDD for providing this opportunity. I look forward to the conversation. I don't know if my fun summer fact, my favorite ice cream I'd have to say is Heath Bar Crunch by Ben & Jerry's. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Angela, you are a little bit newer to our circle of executive directors, CEOs of disability organizations. Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're working and what you're doing.
Thanks, Donna. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and my fellow panelists. I'm Angela Williams. I'm the National President and CEO of Easterseals. Easterseals is an organization that serves the lifespan of individuals from early childhood all the way to senior services. We serve 1.5 million people a year through our 67 affiliates, through workforce development, early childhood intervention, as well as adult services. I am really appreciative of the opportunity to work with a great staff and people that really care about what they do and ensuring that people with disabilities can live, learn, work, and play. And our tagline is all abilities, limitless possibilities. So a little fun fact, I have a giant schnauzer and his name is Samson. And every time we walk him, people want to know where his Delilah is. There is no Delilah.
Well, maybe you'll at some point have another dog and name her Delilah. So welcome, Angela. We're so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Curt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Happy to. And for the folks that have been in the DD Council world for a while, yes, I'm still here. I'm Curt, the Executive Director of the National Disability Rights Network, which is the membership association of the protection and advocacy programs. We now have 9 programs, and we've developed into the cross-disability program, but we were certainly started with the DD program. And as you all know, the P&As are mandated to be on the DD Council. So we obviously have an incredibly close relationship with your groups, both at the local level, but also working collaboratively with NACDD and our other colleagues. The P&As, as you know, is the sort of the legal arm of the disability community. We are invested with some truly terrific authorities given to us by Congress, and we have kept them these 40 years. Both the full range of legal authority, access authority to get into any place where people with disabilities live, work, or go to school. Just one little example, we were able to get into the separated children facilities down at the border because of our strong access authority. And I guess, well, 2 things. One, I decided to put on a suit today, and the good news is it fits after a year and a half of hanging in my closet. And I also, because I started my disability career in Baltimore as the head of the Maryland Disability Law Center, I keep my house in Baltimore, but I also live in DC.
Wonderful, thank you. I know we're having some connectivity issues with John, so we'll weave him into our conversation as we get that sorted out. But thank you all again for being here and engaging in this conversation today to talk about what we heard from Alison and from Emily, what some of our experiences have been so far with this new administration, what are some of the things we still hope to see come forward over the coming months and years, and what's on your minds for your own organization, and finally, how can we all collaborate together, because that's really what it's all about. One of the things I certainly understand is that we are stronger when we are working together. I think many of us have known each other for a very long time. We're all part of bigger coalitions that bring us together to do our advocacy and policy work. As executive directors, we meet together regularly to share thoughts and ideas and make sure that we are supporting our staff teams and our networks to be there to really bring forward good ideas to our federal partners and our colleagues on the Hill. So we do a lot of these things in collaboration, which I think is great. So Curt, I want to start by asking you or getting some of your thoughts. Last week we celebrated the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which some days it's hard for me to believe. It's been 31 years. We've clearly achieved a lot over 31 years, and yet still not all the way there. We heard Alison reference that in her remarks today. There's still work that has not been completed. And there's still times that we feel that we're battling attacks on the ADA. Tell me from your perspective, Curt, where are we today? What do you see your P&As really focused around as it comes to ADA? What can we or should we all be thinking about in collaboration?
Well, you're absolutely right. Let me just say a couple things. I did listen to Emily and Alison, and I always don't believe everything a bureaucrat says, but guess what? These people are the real deal. So your members can feel good that we really do have some amazing advocates for disability issues in places, and it's extending across the entire administration. Ketty Neese, an old employee of the Easterseals, is now going to be the Assistant Secretary of OSERS, where both special education and rehab. And I can go on with all the different people that are now in places where they can really help us on a variety of issues. I was fortunate, gloating a little bit, to go to the White House last Monday for the celebration of the ADA. And it was, in a lot of ways, bittersweet, very hot. We should never pass laws in July.
It always is when it's July.
We have to learn that lesson. But you can't help but think about the fact that we have made such incredible progress over the last 30 years, and yet there's still, as you said, so many things yet. Obviously, the ADA promise about employment has not really happened, and so the White House and the other agencies really trying to focus on and improving the employment of people with disabilities has really got to be, I think, really one of our top priorities. We have better luck, I think, with the implementation of Olmstead, although that is a constant battle. As you well know, there's a lot of pressure and pushback from families of people in institutions, the facilities themselves. And so we always have to be vigilant to make sure that the promise of community integration is real. And you've all heard me say this a million times, we can't take people out of big, bad places and put them into little bad places. And so the quality of the community is really essential. And obviously, from my perspective, I think that's the vigilance of the P&A to make sure that those community places are safe and sound and good quality. I'll just say one last thing. One of our major problems is we really, one of the hallmarks of the P&As is getting out there and doing face-to-face investigations and monitoring. And that, of course, evaporated during COVID. And so we are pushing really hard to get our folks back on the street. If you can't see and taste and smell what's going on in those places, you don't know what's really happening. And so that's one of our top priorities, to get our folks back out in the field as quickly as possible, safely. So they're protected, but they also don't, inadvertently hurt our clients. But it's critical that we get out there.
Right. So safety in the community, Curt, I think is a priority for all of us. Julia, you've done tremendous work. Curt just mentioned, he said sometimes he doesn't believe everything that the feds say. I think we all feel that way, but that the two speakers we just heard from, Emily and Alison, are the real deal. Julia, I know you work very closely, in particular with Alison. We all have for many years, but you in particular around HCBS, home and community-based settings, and creating those communities that feel safe, that are welcome, that are the best place for people with disabilities to be. What were some of your thoughts from what you heard today around some of those priorities? Were we hearing the real deal, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that it's been so great as the new administration has come in to be able to shift from a sort of purely defensive stance on so many disability rights issues to more proactive priorities, and to have folks who deeply understand and who come from the disability community shaping policy, and to have those open lines of communication, to have our feedback solicited instead of having to beat down the door. And to have just leadership who believe in and speak publicly about disability rights. I'm not really concerned about whether or not we're getting the real deal from the White House. I'm more concerned about whether or not congressional leadership is willing to commit the level of resources that we need to truly realize the promises of Olmstead in the ADA, and to prevent, 10 years down the line, seeing another pandemic just rip through congregate settings. I think that, I want to find the right way to say this. I just worry about whether or not we're acting with the urgency and doing what we need to prevent that from happening again, because that was a policy choice. Our reliance on congregate settings, our underinvestment in home and community-based services, but just the systematic devaluation of the life and liberty of people with disabilities, those were all policy choices that we as a society have made over decades and decades, not usually all at once, often not very explicitly, but they're a result, of funding decisions, of decisions about what we would focus on and what we would elevate. And that has brought us to where we are today, where we have a legal right, which is very important to live in the community, but those services and systems really aren't in place. Many folks here are theoretically living in the community or having experiences very similar to institutional experiences. And we know how to prevent that. We know what policies need to be changed, but we need resources in order to implement those policies. The White House, has had a real full-throated support of expanding access to home and community-based services, but ultimately Congress has to decide to act and has to decide to make that investment. And so ASAN, and I think every organization on this call and most disability rights advocates I know are very focused right now on reaching out to our members of Congress and explaining the urgency and the significance of this need and why they need to not just take some token action, not just acknowledge again that it's important, but really put their money where their mouth is and make those investments.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to welcome in John Cheetah from AUCD. I hope that you're able to fully access us now. John, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, Donna, and thanks. Apologies for the bandwidth issues.
Happens.
Grateful to be a part of this panel and to join my colleagues. I'm John Cheetah, the Executive Director at the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. We are celebrating our 50th year this year, nationwide network of centers, education, training, and service centers that are also deep in the advocacy weeds with all of you, advancing the cause of people with disabilities. So glad to be here.
Glad you could join us. So Angela, I want to turn to you for a moment as somebody who maybe has some fresher eyes on some of these deep policy issues that those of us who have been working in this IDD space for a long time are deeply familiar with. I want to know, Angela, just, having listened to Emily and Alison, kind of what strikes you as something that's critically important that we should really be thinking about? And alternatively, what are you most worried about or think, and maybe it's the same answer, but what are you worried about or think maybe is missing from the dialogue right now?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, as I am very new to the community. But one thing that strikes me is that we find ourselves at a critical moment in time where great strides can be made. It's like the perfect storm if we are willing to work together. Donna, you said the keyword collaborate, but whether it's public-private partnerships along with the government to make huge systems changes. And Julia said it well, that there is a need, whether it's around telehealth, whether it's assistive technology, whether it's filling the gaps that were not met with the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, access to health care, even more work around education and supporting children. We did at Easterseals a study of the impact of COVID-19 on people with disabilities, on Easterseals as a disability services provider, and on our staff. And what we found were that there were some incredible gaps, but yet opportunities that we need to step into. And we asked the question, how might we? And to answer that question, I'm hoping that Easterseals will be able to collaborate with all of you on that. But what struck us in particular, for example, is that people of color with disabilities and the intersectionality of race, gender, disability, all of those things coming together need to be paid attention to. We, as a result of COVID last year, as a result of the death of George Floyd, created a Black Child Fund, because what we recognize, and there are so many studies that show that Black boys are kicked out of Head Start and early childhood programs because the early intervention or the diagnosis isn't conducted with them. And so what we end up seeing is almost from birth all the way through the lifespan into the prison system. And so there are certain disruptions that can be had right now. And I'll stop by just saying that we were and still are being disrupted. So we need to lean into it. There were exceptions made in order to continue to move society forward, like telehealth and using the use of technology. Let's lean in, keep the pressure on, work with the Biden administration, work with legislators in Congress to get things done.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Michael, I want to turn to you for a moment. Tell us a little bit about some of the priorities you're working on at TASH. Where do you see things moving? And maybe kind of like I asked Angela, like, what are you most worried about? What's keeping you up at night?
In reverse order, COVID keeps me up at night, and I don't mean that in any kind of I mean that in a serious way. And I have to say, you know, I applaud the Biden administration for rightly making this job number one. I think we're seeing in the last several weeks that it remains and will remain job number one. And hats off to the councils and to you and everyone at NACDD for your work in advancing access and awareness about vaccine uptake and how important that is. And I think we all have to keep our eye on that ball. I also just wanted to add that I agree with my fellow panelists here that this administration is the real deal. It won't be perfect. It isn't perfect. But I think both Emily and Alison articulated correctly without bravado the early accomplishments of the administration in pumping funding through the American Rescue Plan, what's happening with COVID and access to vaccines. We are seeing an uptake in vaccines, which is good over the last couple of weeks. So there's some indicators that we're turning that corner, I hope. I think the administration's work to phase out sub-minimum wage, 14C, is laudable. It's day one emphasis on equity, and we heard that from both the presenters prior to our panel is laudable too. So I have high hopes for this administration, and I think rightly so. And that's not to say that we're going to cheerlead the administration either. Alison said, I think her quote was, "It's time for us to think big and bold." Curt alluded to, and others have alluded to that, pumping money into, we need to do what we need to do now, and we have to work with the systems we have, but try to fix them. And also, the administration has talked, I think, rightly about leveling the playing field. I think a lot of us would like to see us flip the script a little bit and not just level the playing field in terms of community-based versus institutional, but where we really keep moving towards and driving towards true community-based supports and services. And I think that's going to be our challenge long-term. But in the near and midterm, I think we need to, frankly, speaking for myself, think we need to support the administration's efforts to really increase funding. I think the Better Care, Better Jobs Act, it's not perfect, but it will go a long way to addressing the waiting lists, and it will help. But it's not the long-term ultimate goal either. So, in terms of where TASH is coming from, Donna and I have had a number of conversations, and Curt and John and I as well, and Angela and Julia. We've been on various coalitions together, and we'll continue to do that. So one of the things, again, thinking about what Alison in particular, she mentioned DTAC, the Disability Employment Technical Assistance Center, that brings together networks to innovate and collaborate, including several of the organizations represented on this panel. We're going to be entering year 2 of that project in October. And, I hope that folks in the council world will continue to participate. We've had good uptake so far. We're really appreciative of 5 people on council, senior folks who are part of the work group for this project. The first year has been building out the infrastructure and trying to actually start providing actual technical assistance. I know there's bumps in the road and there will continue to be, but I think we're starting to hit our stride. And we're appreciative of ACL for their support as we enter the second year of this 5-year project. I'll stop there, Donna.
Thank you. John, you have worked in a previous administration. So you've been on the inside a little bit. What are your thoughts after listening to Alison and Emily? We were talking about, are they the real deal? We like to think, that we are now working with an administration that kind of gets who we are as a disability community and what our needs are. What did you hear today, and where do you think this administration may be able to take us?
Yeah, great question, Donna. I think we heard Alison say that she was impressed, having worked in multiple administrations, at the level of coordination that's happening within this particular administration. And I can tell you, being on the inside within the Obama administration and even in the second term of that administration, I don't think the level of cooperation, engaging multiple agencies, creating the infrastructure that they have to force people to sit down and sit across from one another, not just sending emails trying to coordinate efforts or to search for joint funding opportunities, for example, but really to even virtually sit across from one another, have hard conversations, agree on shared priorities, put the turf wars aside. And I'm not naive to think that those turf wars still don't exist, but I do think they've come out early. They've come out hitting the ground running in ways that have made an immediate difference. And I'll just pick up on the equity thread that some of you have talked about already. We've seen multiple executive orders, and executive orders are great. They're great high-level value statements, if nothing else. But then to see the work that's happening at the agency level within ACL, and all of us have been engaged with Alison and other leaders there, that they mean it. I think there's behavior change that's going to be required of all of us, not just in the data that we're collecting, not just in the research that's being done. For example, in the agency that I used to run, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living and Rehabilitation Research, in their existing funding opportunity announcements, they are demanding that the researchers look at the statistical demographic makeup of their population areas where they're going to do the research. And those projects aren't going to be funded unless they have specific plans as to how they're going to engage all the different subpopulations to ensure that research looks like the metropolitan area or the rural area where that research is being done. And we know, by and large, a lot of the research that we have in an IDD context, in a disability context, is largely on white populations. It doesn't translate to other subpopulations. So it's great to see this progress. It needs to be sustained. And we, as DD partners, certainly the USEDs in this context, need to be working with the PNAs and the DD councils to ensure that we're lifting all boats. And it's a great opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. And Angela, I see you nodding your head to some of what John was just saying about equity and getting deeper into communities. Do you have any thoughts or want to share anything that's working for Easterseals that maybe others of us should be thinking about or doing?
Well, interestingly enough, just before I joined with you all this afternoon, we are getting ready to test some new curriculum. And I've working with Curt on this as well, funded by Comcast, to create training for advocates for Black children with disabilities and working with them on their IEPs. So it goes back to what I said, and looking at ways when we're talking about intersectionality that we can put a specific focus on helping underserved populations. Secondly, we are working in partnership with Abbott, and they're funding outreach to underserved communities to reach children, to get them tested, and to make sure that if there's a need for any intervention, that they have access to it. And if Easterseals does not provide that particular intervention that's needed, to make sure that they are connected to the right persons. So we understand that not everybody can be reached, but we should be able to do our part. Something else that we are looking at, and we're actually doing at Easterseals, and we've been working around transportation and accessibility in rural communities, and working with farmers, and again, access to technology through assistive technology grants, as well as, again, going back to transportation, making sure that their needs are met. We're also working with youth as they're in transition, to make sure that they have seamless transitions from once they get out of high school and move into other segments. But again, we have to all be intentional. And if we're not, and just continue to do things in a very rote manner, then we're not going to disrupt the system. We're not going to be as inclusive as we need to be. And I think all of us are really clear about what happens when someone or a segment of our population does not have a seat at the table, does not have a voice. That's not the America that we live in. That's not just. That's not the society that any of us want to be a part of. So we have to make sure that at whatever seat we're currently in, that we're doing our part to make sure everyone's included.
Couldn't agree more. And Julia, I see you nodding your head a lot. Do you have some thoughts around what Angela was just talking about, both in terms of the equity, but also talking about the project about advocacy training, because I know ASAN does exemplary work in advocacy training. So what are your thoughts around what she's just said? Do you have anything to add on to that?
Not really. I really appreciated the point about looking at what we do sort of automatically and by rote, and stepping back and re-examining that. I think in so many different ways that can, not having that examination allows inequity to creep in, allows exclusionary practices to creep in. And when you do that re-examination, you can discover, again, just things you haven't tried that are going to work better and serve more people and be more inclusive. I think that's a really key point.
Go ahead, Curt.
Well, and at the risk of becoming slightly contrary about this, I certainly agree that intersectionality and intentionality are, but from my perspective, with the P&As and because we do the direct service part of the program, it's hard for me to understand how you could not do that. When we go into juvenile facilities, 85% of the kids in juvenile facilities are kids of color. The kids who are being suspended and expelled and getting shortened school days, most of those are Black kids. And down the list, you almost have to work hard to go the opposite way because of the inequality that so many people of color with disabilities are experiencing. And then, of course, we do have to remind our partners in the civil rights community that they have in their membership are people with disabilities. And so that's a dual kind of thing. So I'm not saying I don't agree. I just feel like, as someone who was a legal services attorney for 6 years in Baltimore City, once again, it was pretty clear what was happening to poor people, to Black people, that systemic racism was keeping them down. So it's something that I hope I've carried with me, even though I'm this old white guy. But I know it's an important issue. But we created the Native American P&A back in the 90s because we knew that population was so underserved, especially in the Southwest. So I do think that within the disability community, there's been some attention, and we just have to lift it up and make sure that everybody realizes that. Speaking of that, I do have an ask for the DD Council since I've got them. We've just experienced a bit of a disaster when, after the FDA ruled that shock treatments could not be utilized. Our friends, JRC, Judge Rothenberg Center, of course, it was overturned by a court. And we're working very hard with the Justice Department to see if we can't do that. But I think that the P&As and the DD councils should be looking at the out-of-state placements that are being paid for by the State Department of Education, by Medicaid, by the DD agency, and start talking about bringing those kids home in their states. And so one way of putting a stake in this vampire called JRC is to cut off the funds and start arguing with the state agencies that are sending these kids there and paying exorbitant amounts of money so they can be shocked. And for what it's worth, about 55 kids of the 300, about 50 residents, they're not all kids, are getting shocked, but the rest are in miserable shape as well. So it isn't just the kids, people that are being shocked, it's the whole place. So that's my plea for us.
If I can just add to that, state level advocates should also be looking at foster care funds and juvenile justice funds, because we know that those are also being used to send kids. Most of the residents at the Judge Rothenberg Center are people of color, and are often not actually people with significant disabilities, but are people of color, often with disabilities that weren't properly diagnosed or supported, who've been funneled through the justice system. So it's a great way for councils to really put those principles of racial justice into action and look beyond just like classic disability funding streams, although please do look at those too.
So Donna, could I pick?
Yeah, I was just going to turn to you because AUCD has done so much work in this area. So please share some thoughts with us, John.
Yeah, well, specifically Curt's thoughts about, his experiences with his agency. Unfortunately, you're getting those folks, Curt, and trying to rectify those largely civil rights issues because of a failed system. And you're experiencing the consequences of bad systems, and in a lot of cases, bad training. And I think training in particular is a huge opportunity here, whether it's education professionals, whether it's health professionals. We know implicit bias is real, and it's huge in a disability context. It's huge in a racial context. And we've got a lot of work to do as a network. We are addressing this head on. It's been a priority of our board chair this year, Tawara Good, who many of you know, who's the director of the Center for Cross-Cultural Health at Georgetown University. We've had hard conversations as a board. We've had hard conversations with all of our directors across all three parts of our network to get folks to examine, what does your staff look like? What does your community look like? And, if these issues were easy, they would have been solved a long time ago. But again, that intentionality piece, if you're not having the hard conversations, if you're not addressing the elephant in the room, it's not going to go away. So.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, what is TASH working on in terms of the intentionality and really being disruptive?
Well, it's one project that I wanted to highlight it's called Storytellers for Change. And we got this project off the ground with the support of the Michigan DD Council. So, I want to again thank the Michigan Council for its leadership and for putting its money where its mouth is, frankly. It's a 2-year project. We're still, about 2/3 of the way through year one. Long story short, we are going to be collecting at least 50 stories of self-advocates about what inclusion means to them in employment, in education, in their community, where they live, how they recreate, how they worship, all aspects of life. And the council rightly has made it clear that we need to really advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in this project and intentionally reach people of color, people of different genders, different sexual orientations, different ages, people from all over Michigan, which is a very diverse state as diversity goes. So we're starting out intentionally in Wayne County, the Detroit metropolitan area, but going to be working across the state. We also are going to be expanding this project through another funding source, SiriusXM, a modest grant, but we're going to be working on a similar project in California. Also happens to be a particularly diverse state with its own opportunities and challenges, and we're going to be starting that project in the fall. But we wouldn't be going to California if it weren't for the Michigan DD Council, in short. And so we're excited about it. We're still early on, but we're making some progress. And I'd be glad offline to share some more information as we move along in this.
That's great. Thank you, Mike. You know, one of the issues that I think we saw front and center over this last almost year and a half now has been with assistive technology. We've called it the digital divide. And I heard our speakers earlier today talking a little bit about this, and of course, in relationship to the infrastructure bill. I think that funding so that we can expand assistive technology is critical for a multitude of reasons. One, for people with disabilities to be connected. We certainly saw how critical that was during COVID. It's part of what gets at our education system and helping children to be educated. It helps all of us work, but it's also, it can be something that could help unify us more and bring more equity to the table. So I'm curious to get some thoughts from all of you around what do you see happening around assistive technology? What do we need to be doing around the infrastructure bill to advocate for funding for assistive technology? What messaging, again, can we use all of our collective networks to really shout out loud? Angela, I know you were really working on some ways that we can bring all of us together with some bold messaging for the Hill. Would love to hear anybody's thoughts. Who wants to jump in first?
Well, this is Curt again. Again, the P&As, we do have dedicated funding for assistive technology. And I do think, for example, I mentioned earlier about employment, I think assistive technology could be a linchpin for getting more people with intellectual disabilities into the workforce. We have seen that happen in the sheltered environment where we've gotten assistive technology for people, trained them, and then the workshop won't let them use it because guess what? If they got more proficient, they'd have to be paid more. And they don't want that to happen because their business model is paying a lot less to people with disabilities, pay big salaries to their administrators. But the fact that getting this incredible technology into people's hands so they can actually use it in a meaningful way, like better employment outcomes, is something we're working on and want to keep pushing as hard as we can.
Curt, I want to just piggyback on what you just said, because technology really is the great connector, and it's almost impossible to live out our daily lives without access to technology. We know that there are broadband gaps around the country. We talk about the digital divide, but what we know is that when a person has access to whatever assistive technology, in order for them to be able to engage in daily life functions, or access to smart technology in order to have a telehealth visit, or in order to meet with a therapist, it's extremely important. And so when there is an investment that in technology that allows there to be a level playing field, then I think that's the nirvana. The second thing I just want to point out, going back to the workforce development piece, there used to be hesitancy prior to COVID for companies to want to hire a person with a disability. There's this myth that if a company hires a person with a disability and complies with the ADA, it's going to cost thousands of dollars. That's not a myth. The average could be about $100 to a couple $100. The second myth is that when you have to to be compliant for a person with disabilities, they're not going to be as productive, et cetera, et cetera. Well, since we have all, for the most part, been working from home, and we have seen people, the workforce being very productive, there is no reason, no excuse why employers can't hire people with disabilities, allow them to work from home, allow them to have to be productive, to be able to earn their own income, to be able to have spending spending money to meet their basic needs and beyond, basically to thrive. And so that's when I think about technology as that great leveler, those are all the aspects of what I'm seeing at this moment in time.
I want to add a little bit more nuance to the discussion about technology, similar to that, because I think that often when we talk about this, we talk about acquiring devices, which is of course key, expanding access to broadband, like very physical infrastructure. And I think that's important, and I don't need to elaborate on that. But I do think we need to keep in mind some implications around end users. So for example, if we're talking about home and community-based services, we know that there are some people for whom there's just no substitute for in-person support, but also lots of people for whom technology can replace some hours of direct support and enable more independence, more privacy, like things that people really want, which is great. But we need to make sure that the folks who are being supported via technology understand that technology and what it's doing and how to use it. You don't want to, for example, have a remote monitoring setup that can increase someone's independence without the person being monitored really understanding what's happening and how they can interact with it and how they can keep their privacy. I think we've also had an interesting issue with this when it comes to technology for people who can't rely on speech to communicate, or alternative and augmentative communication devices, or AAC, where we've made a lot of strides through the AT network, through a lot of different programs, through schools, in making speech generating devices more available to people with speech disabilities, which is great. But now we're seeing a problem over and over and over again where a student gets access to a device, but very little support to learn how to use that device, let alone say how to use that device to learn language, which might be this whole other multi-year process. And then you see people saying, well, this doesn't work because the person was never actually supported to learn how to use that device to communicate. So we have to think beyond just getting the technology into people's hands. For the communication issue that I just mentioned, ASAN, AACD, a number of organizations are working on reintroducing the Access to Free Speech for All Act, which was introduced last Congress by Senator Casey and would include funding to go beyond just the AT Act programs to really fund that sort of support and technical assistance for individuals and families to use devices. I don't know that that applies to every area of technology, but I would encourage us as a community to, yes, think about getting devices, think about access, but also then think about what other supports might be necessary to really embed that in people's lives.
And to ensure that our service support system is reimbursing for that training and understanding component as well, which is hugely challenging. I agree with you. On the advocacy front, I would also say that, yes, there are power in numbers. We certainly should be working together among all of us, and you know, everyone's aware of CCD and the collective advocacy that's happening there. The USEDs, many of those in states are also the AT grant programs as well. So they've got good information. They've got good data on the effectiveness and not just anecdotal stories, but increasingly they are creating stories, you know, that power of storytelling. And it was great to hear Mike talk about that from his perspective and his agency. It does make a difference. So understanding the successes of those technologies in the same way that we're using people with lived experience to explain in videos to overcome the hesitancy piece with vaccines, we could be doing the same with technology. For those who are afraid of technology, don't have it, don't understand it, don't know how to use it. Lots of things that we can do, but using those voices for those who have gotten it and experienced positive outcomes in our advocacy work as well. So I think lots of opportunity for collaboration. All of us are touching this issue in one way or another. Together, we really could help to move the needle.
Great. So you mentioned storytelling. Several of you have talked about storytelling, which we have a lot of DD councils that are very engaged in a variety of ways of telling stories. And I think those of you who are grantees under ACL know that that is something that ACL turns to all of us for, right? Is storytelling and collecting and sharing that back with them. How many of you have had a chance to see the film 6,000 and Waiting? Any of you yet? That's something we need to make sure to get out to you. So the Georgia DD Council produced a film called 6,000 in waiting. Of course, in Georgia, there's now more than 7,000 waiting to get into the community. And that is certainly one way of telling stories. DD councils have many different ways, but I'm curious to know from each of you, how else can we all be collaborating? Because clearly it is a strength that many DD councils have. How can we all work together? You know, Michael gave a great example of work that he's been doing with the Michigan DD Council. Julia, I know ASAN does a lot of work on advocacy and telling stories as well. So are we missing anything that we haven't done that we still need to get to tell legislators our stories?
You know, I just have a question. Again, Donna, you mentioned that I am newer to this work, but the question for me is, does the disability come together to state capitals, not just with our own individual organizations, but collectively to advocate? I just feel like there's still this continued need for the voices of the people on the ground, those that are affected, to be able to tell their stories, to be seen, to be heard, and to hold legislators accountable. So again, to me, it's about not just Easterseals having its state advocacy days or days on the Hill and others having theirs, but can we together really come up with these joint legislative priorities at a state level and show that we are united on some very key issues?
So that's really a great question. I know many DD councils do have their advocacy day, and I'm sure many of you who are represented here are doing similarly. You know, I like to think of DD councils as kind of the convener in the state. You know, it's that table where everybody in the disability community can come together. And so I hope that our attendees here who are listening are hearing what you're saying, Angela, and to think maybe a little bit broader. I think it varies state to state as to who's coming together to advocate at the State House. I think in many states there are deep collaborations that include DD councils, USEDS, PNAs, the ARCs, maybe Easterseals, Epilepsy Foundation affiliates, self-advocacy networks, whether it's through ASAN or SABE, Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered. So it looks a little different in each state, but maybe we need to do more. Maybe there's always more that can be done.
So Donna, this is Curt. I do think, you know, the precursor to convincing these policymakers, legislators, you know, to do the right thing is to make sure that people with disabilities vote. And that the voting process is accessible for them, and that we can send a message to all politicians that they better pay attention to the disability vote. It's huge, and it can make the difference in a tight election if they talk about disability issues and make sure it's front and center in their campaigns on both sides. We've done a lot of work in that area to try to really make the case that smart politicians, a candidate, should pay attention to disability issues and therefore try to encourage the community on either side of the aisle. And so then I think it makes, if we can get that message through, those of us who go to the Hill all the time and throw ourselves up against those walls, you know, have, I think, a more receptive audience, because they know they have constituents who are people with disabilities and will vote and could make a difference in their election. And you know, it's all about them winning re-election. So I think voting has to be.
You read my mind, Curt. I was really going to turn to voting because, you know, so many of us obviously saw a lot of activity with the most recent elections at NACDD. We had our own voting campaign, One Vote Now. We partnered with you all at NDRN, and many of us collaborated together to really get out that disability vote. And at NACDD, we certainly don't see that as just only happening in election years, but we need to have this dialogue about voting going on all the time.
An important issue for, I mean, it's, of course, obviously we spend a lot of time on accessibility of voting, but what I get nervous about is when people vote against their own interests, when they don't identify themselves as people with disabilities and realize just how important public policy decisions are in their life. And when I see parents of children with severe disabilities voting for a person who cut Medicaid services because they were concerned about something else, immigration or whatever. And it's like, no, you have to understand this is about your lives, and you have to identify that make sure you identify that you're a person with disability when you vote, and look at the candidates and how they're going to affect your life.
And I think it also comes to making sure that people with disabilities are being empowered to understand the issues that are being talked about and to have their own voice in those conversations. Like, I can't tell you, I mean, I've told you, Curt, you're familiar with this, but for the folks on the webinar, how many times during the ACA repeal fight in 2017, we were trying to explain to folks that this would cut Medicaid and that would hurt people with disabilities. And we would hear, I don't have Medicaid, I'm on a waiver. And that's not people's fault, like this stuff isn't talked about in ways that are easy to understand. But that really was like a pivotal moment for ASAN, and we really restructured everything we were doing around civic engagement. So now we've got a lot of different easy read toolkits that are designed to be read by self-advocates with intellectual disabilities about Medicaid, about the federal budget, about the ADA, to connect these sort of abstract political concepts that you might hear about on the news to your life. And to give people the vocabulary and the tools to talk about it. And then also just the skills to tell your story in an impactful way. We put out a toolkit this spring called Telling Your Story for a Political Purpose that takes that framework that self-advocates are so often asked to do of tell us your story, and explains how to be in charge of your story and how to connect your story to your advocacy goal and do that effectively in a lot of different advocacy mediums. Like, it's not enough to just have a self-advocate that you can trot out on stage to give their inspiring story and everyone claps and sheds a tear and then moves on with their life. Like, self-advocates can be really powerful agents of change, but we need access to the tools and the resources that empower us to do that and give us the same skills that other folks have access to. So we've been really focused on that. We just did a toolkit about the process that we use to make accessible resources so that more DD councils and other organizations can start doing that as well. It's all on our website. But I think it all sort of reinforces itself, right? Like, if people with disabilities are seen as these sort of passive objects in civic conversations, then we're not going to have a lot of sway with policymakers. We're not going to see ourselves as a voting bloc. And we're not going to connect the policies that policymakers are talking about to, oh, those are my services. Those are my rights. And so you have to go at all those different pieces all at once, I think, in order to really have a powerful and organized community.
And if all that weren't enough in a voting context for everything we have to worry about, Donna, you asked earlier what keeps a couple other folks up at night. It's getting access to the polls to begin with. We're seeing everything that's happening at a state level in erecting barriers to voters, making it more difficult to vote, more ID requirements. And we know that people with disabilities are going to get trapped in that as well. So it's an ongoing challenge. Curt, I know that's more in your wheelhouse than ours, but something we all need to be concerned about.
For sure. Julia, ASAN has just created some amazing toolkits and information. We share all of your voting things are on our One Vote Now site. Anything that you have done around COVID is on our Get Out the Vaccine site. Do others of you have great resources on any of these topics that we're touching on today that you want DD councils to know about? You've got a captive audience right now. Are there things that they should be turning to your website for, to learn from, to adopt, use back home?
I'll just say, coming soon, the Easterseals website has tons of tools available even now, starting with Make the First Five Count, which is an online questionnaire to identify or flag whether there are some developmental delays in a child. Secondly, as I mentioned, we are getting ready to launch the Train Advocates for Black Children for IEPs. Of course, that same training can be used for all children. That's going to be on our website in September, next month. And then I would just share a number of other toolkits similar to what Julia said when we were talking about the voting and getting out to vote and different things. So Easterseals.com is a great resource. In addition, we have just put in an all-in disability 10-point plan for companies that want to learn about how they can be more inclusive for people with disabilities.
No, Donna, you and your team do a great job of getting information into the hands of your state councils from a policy standpoint and ensuring that they can be active and advocate in a meaningful way and in a timely way. I think just a plug for our newsletter as well, the Disability Policy News. And kudos to Julia for really leading the way with plain language. And that's something we've started to do, is to ensure that we've got plain language translations, if you will, for all of those, it's sometimes difficult, complex topics. But if we want people with lived experience to engage in a meaningful way, they have to understand what's happening, and to make sure that we're communicating in a way that everyone can communicate. I will also give the administration credit as well. This administration, unlike any other, are taking that plain language concept seriously, probably more so than a number of others, but they're hearing us. The White House is hearing us when we're talking about plain language.
Yeah,
we'll need your help, because we lawyers never talk in plain language. So any help you can give us, it'll be welcome.
Yeah, no, it is a challenge, but you're right, John. We're seeing it. Mike and I we're both talking about the RFP that's been out for SARTAC for the next 5 years. Big focus on plain language with CDC and with the Administration for Community Living, and all. I think we're all kind of in that space of really trying to do more. DD councils clearly do a lot of work. There's some amazing videos that have been created, and all kinds of detailed information around plain language. There's so much expertise amongst councils, as well as with ASAN, and of course the work done at AUCD and Green Mountain Self-Advocates, who I think we all lean on them a lot for their expertise and their deep work in this area. So I think we are making good inroads, but it does make me feel better seeing that is actually being mandated now by ACL, that whatever work we do, it has to be in plain language.
Donna, I was just wanting to go back to the original maybe concept of the session. We've been talking a lot about ACL in the White House, but I'm happy to say that I've had really good conversations with the Department of Transportation, at HUD, certainly Department of Justice. I even had my first conversation with the Department of Interior to talk about how they impact on people with disabilities. And there's just an openness in all of these places that we really have never really had that much contact. Again, my favorite word, linchpin. I think transportation is a linchpin to community integration. If we cannot make sure people can get out of their houses and get around the community, then again, we've just brought them out and isolated them as much as if they were in some large congregate facility. So transportation is just a huge issue that we need to focus on. I'm hoping this infrastructure bill, if it, who am I kidding? If it actually happens, is going to make some major steps in making all kinds of transportation modes accessible.
Absolutely. Are others of you making good inroads? Are you meeting with others from the administration?
So I'll say that it's been challenging because while, Alison and some folks at ACL and the White House were installed sort of on day one, a lot of agencies are still staffing up.
Sure.
So we've just started outreach to some folks at the Department of Education, now that Katie Neese is there, and the Department of Labor, and now that Taryn Williams is there. Like, we know that there are good folks in place. We just have to wait for them to actually officially start their jobs before we can get on their schedules. That's been our experience, at least.
Right.
I haven't had much luck yet with the Social Security Administration. That's like the Borg for you Star Trek fans, trying to get in there and talk to those people. But there is some new leadership coming on board, and maybe we'll see that start gigantic monolith, start to open up and really start looking at disability qualifications. We have a representative payee program, and I am sorry to say, the good news and the good news. The good news is we're out looking at representative payees and finding about 80% are okay. And the other good news is we're finding 20% are doing horrible things to their beneficiaries, and we're able to hopefully change that. So it is, I'm trying to put that in a positive sense, but I am very concerned about the financial exploitation of the most severe people with disabilities in our country because of the total lack of oversight for decades by Social Security about representative payees, both fee-for-service payees and even family members, to go out there and find a rep payee and then you find the child hasn't been in school in 3 months. It's like, why? So we're picking up some rocks and seeing some not pretty things underneath them.
Right. So we have just a few more minutes, but let me just throw out the topic of budget. One of the things I think that we are seeing that I think is a positive right now is that this administration is funneling a lot of money into, not only the grantee programs, by which I mean the USIDS, PNAs, and DD councils, but a lot of other disability programs. And of course, we know that if we can make some inroads through the infrastructure bill and through the reconciliation language for Better Care, Better Jobs Act, there could be some nice chunks of funding that get out there for our programs and for the population writ large. Any thoughts on, are we moving in those right directions? What should we be telling Congress? How do we do that in an organized way? And really, again, maybe it comes back to storytelling, but how do we keep those messages out there? We need the funding. Curt, you and I and John and others, we yelled and screamed for months about funding that was needed to address COVID, right? And we finally got there. So is this administration listening more? And what else do we need to yell and scream about in terms of funding to get the job done?
Well, with all due respect to my friend Mike, I was very happy that Alison took that CDC money that she referenced in her comments and used it to build on us, on the existing network. And I've been somewhat frustrated in the past. We're always turning to consultants, beltway bandits to come up with a new idea, and then it takes them a year to get off the ground. The fact that a lot of that COVID money went to the USAIDs, to the PNAs, the councils, independent living centers, meant that they were utilizing the structures that were already out there and had experience in working with the range of people with disabilities. And I thought that was an important thing and something we need to build on with the administration and Congress. Use us. We're out there. We've been around for 40, 50 years, as John said. Why are you going off to somebody else who doesn't even know the community?
Well said.
And I would say, we haven't talked a lot about the CDC today, but they have boatloads of money. Yes, it's great that they gave ACL $100 million to distribute, but their primary constituencies are public health agencies, and we all know those agencies are very concerned about congestive heart failure, diabetes, and anti-smoking. They've got a lot to learn about disability, and we're doing a lot of work in an emergency preparedness response context with ASHTO and HO and the public health folks, but the CDC themselves, there's an awful lot of dollars there that they could be using. To your point, Curt, leverage the existing infrastructure. We know it. We know the people. We know how to get information to them and how to get them to respond to it. So lots of opportunity there as well.
And I think, again, if something we've learned from COVID is just what you said, the lack of understanding in local health departments about the needs of people with disabilities. We found out I think it was in Florida, where the local health department was sending PPE to nursing homes and assisted living, but not to group homes because they didn't think that was necessary. And frankly, there are many more seriously involved people with disabilities in group homes than there are in assisted living. And they were just oblivious to the fact that that's where so many people with disabilities live. So we have a lot of work to do with the health departments.
Yeah, not to relitigate old wounds, but just the utter confusion when CDC guidance would come out over the last year and a half about what counted as a residential living place or a long-term care place, what counted as a developmental disability, what didn't. All of this could have been avoided if there was just a little bit of disability competency in places in the CDC that aren't dedicated to disability, to clarify that information and make it understandable. That's something we've really stressed to the White House, and I'm hoping that as we look at our public health system in the future, we're able to give some more thought to that. I think AUCD in particular is really well positioned to drive a lot of that change. But it's just such an illustration of the harm that comes when disability isn't well understood by policy.
So I want to kind of give you each an opportunity before we close out today to share some final thoughts, anything that we haven't touched on that you feel is important from the perspective of your organization, your network, how you're connecting with DD councils, anything else that you want to talk about that is keeping you up at night. And any thoughts and ideas of more ways that we can be collaborating, partnering together, and really making sure that our voice is heard with this new administration on the Hill, with new members of Congress. What else have we not talked about today that we really just want to make sure we get to before we close out? Mike, can I start with you?
Well, yeah, I'm gonna make a plug. One is for Reinventing Quality, which happens August 9th through 12th. The registration deadline is this Friday. And you can Google that. Donna, I don't think I can get into the chat. I've tried and I'm not going to try anymore. So otherwise I'd put the link in. The other thing, not just addressed to my friend Curt, but DTAC is here to stay for the next 4 years. And I'd encourage everyone to come along and help lead it as the councils are. And we've got good P&A folks, and we've got good USED folks and TBI folks and SIL folks helping us to lead and shape it. And go on to TASH.org and you can find the link to that, and also to our YES Center, which is Youth Employment Solutions. That's about transition. And that project is wrapping up in August. We're going to have a final report coming out. But in the meantime, there are some good resources on both of those dedicated websites. So I will make that plug, and I'll stop there. Thanks again, though, Donna, and everyone at NACDD, and to my colleagues on the panel. This has been a terrific opportunity, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Julia?
So I think one of the challenges that comes with a time like this, where we've had so many years of defending really, really basic things, and so progress on so many other issues has stalled, and now we feel like we have this window of opportunity, is that it's very difficult to have 10 or 20 first priorities. But everything that we're working on really, is urgent, has needed to happen for a very long time, is a top priority. So, at ASAN, we're working on a number of different policy priorities to increase self-determination, like expanding access to home and community-based services, ending the minimum wage, eliminating restraint and seclusion, expanding access to communication, making SSI work better, all these things. And we realized we can't ask our grassroots to pick and choose. So we're doing something this month that we're calling Action August, where we've got an action alert up on our website that offers a menu of 5 different legislative priorities that folks can take action on depending on what's interesting to them. And I would just encourage councils to look at that enormous list of priorities that I know you all have, and think about, to the extent that things can streamline and reinforce each other and sort of be grouped together, taking advantage of that. And then acknowledging that there's a lot going on. It's hard. We don't have the capacity to do everything at once and to get as far as we need to on everything. But at the same time, the disability community is really wrapped up and really eager to put our energy towards something constructive. And I think it is possible to make progress on a lot of these things. We just have to be thoughtful and honest about it, and about what a difficult list it is.
Thank you, Julia. I appreciate that. Angela?
I want to go back to political civic engagement. I think that the disability community should take pages from the playbook of other civil rights movements, and where we now even see around women organizing. And why not pull together PACs and action committees to get people with disabilities elected into office? I think it's even that step further, and having that voice, that presence, that makes all the difference. So that's something different and unique. It starts at the county level, state level, as well as the federal level.
That's a wonderful suggestion. I know we do have a handful of folks who came from DD councils who eventually went on to state legislative roles, which is very exciting. And I think that a lot of our advocacy work and training and programs like Partners in Policymaking really do try to get people started on their path. So to our advocates out there, please hear what Angela is saying. This is the time to get active and really take some of those next steps. I think some of us will probably remember some bigger efforts a number of years ago to really sort of work to get more people with disabilities to run for national office, for Congress, et cetera, and really struggled with that. I think we have to think about things like, where does the funding come from? How do we really back people? How do we get some of these things started? So I love that idea, something to really be focusing on for whether it's 2 years from now, 4 years from now. Is, we're always in an election cycle. So good things for us to be thinking about. Thank you for that, Angela. And if you have any thoughts, Angela, on other civil rights organizations, I think most of us are well connected with the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and a few other sort of national organizations, but maybe there are some at state and local levels that our DD councils may or may not be connected with that we need to be thinking about more. So if thoughts come to mind, let us know so we can share that kind of information out with our network as well. Curt, what are your final there's never final words with Curt.
Well, as you know, I mean, the P&A systems, because if someone has an issue, they come to us, and so we're in a lot of issues. And I appreciate what Julia is saying, feeling like we're pulled in a million different directions, and hope we're not dissipating our energy and our resources. One issue that's been has come up recently that, again, I think the councils could certainly help with is there's still some silos in the federal government. And so SAMHSA, Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, which supposedly takes care of people with mental illness, needs to think more about the duly diagnosed people with both intellectual disabilities and mental illness. And we've been having some interesting conversations about whose responsibility that is, where those services should come from, and it just raised for me again that there really needs to be that kind of conversation between ACL and SAMHSA to make sure that that very difficult to serve population isn't lost and not sort of forgotten because they're pointing fingers at each other. It's your responsibility, not ours. So we're I think in a unique position to try to push that. A similar issue we're hopefully going to in the next month. Probably going to get sued, but we're going to release a report on these private psychiatric facilities for children that are all over the country and funded by hedge fund people and for-profit organizations. And we have some pretty ugly experiences. We're going to partner with Paris Hilton to see if we can get some star power attention to this issue. For what it's worth, she happened to be in one when she was in Utah and was considered fairly abused. So we're gonna, we're not gonna miss a scandal. Just like we want to use Britney Spears to raise awareness about guardianship, conservatorship, representative payees, fiduciary, all of the restrictions on people with disabilities, freedom, and these aren't maybe my favorite people or good friends of mine, but why not use that attention that's coming to issues that we've been working on for years. So there's a whole series of things out there that I think we can to really get the public's attention. And I think I think that was the last thing I would say is I do think we have a tendency to talk to ourselves and aren't thinking about the larger community out there about disability. I mean, we always are saying things like, the Americans with Disabilities Act is not just for people with disabilities, it's for all of us who are going to become disabled. And so it's for everybody, but I don't think the general public thinks in those terms. And so I think we have some work to do to get our message out, our larger message out there. Otherwise, an op-ed piece from a David Axelrod has a fair amount of traction, because people, well, that makes sense. No, it doesn't, but they don't know that. And so I think we have to get out of our little silos here and start talking to the larger community.
Well said. Thank you. John.
Yeah, I can't compete with Curt's shameless name dropping of names. But I will say, in response to David Axelrod, our celebrity, if you will, within our organization, Liz Weintraub, just did have a commentary in the Hill that was initially pitched to the New York Times in response to Axelrod, and they didn't want it. But it is important that we continue to tell those stories. I think I am greatly encouraged by the collaborations that have happened as a result of the extra money that's come from the CDC among the DDAC partners. Some great things that are happening at the state level. I know in Wisconsin there was a statewide group that was formed that included all the DDAC partners, including the state LTSS program service agency. In Maine, all of the DDAC partners and self-advocates as well, including some nonprofit organizations, from what I understand, were working together to shoot videos for hesitancy purposes to overcome that. So I think continuing, and I'm doing this within the USEDS, that drumbeat of not just engaging the other DDAC partners at the state levels, but organizations like Angela's, like Mike and Julia's. We all have different competencies. We all have different strengths. We often all have the same goals in mind. So where we have common priorities, common goals, it just makes sense to leverage our collective strengths to continue to move the needle.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank all of you so much. This was such an incredible conversation. We touched on numerous topics, and I think we have a lot of really great things to go home this evening and marinate upon as we think about how we will continue to interact with this new-ish administration and this Congress and with our state legislatures and with each other and that bigger, broader community that each of you has been referencing, thinking more about how we reach out more to other civil rights organizations, get beyond our DD walls, get out to the broader disability community, but really out to the world, because that's how we're going to create change. I value and respect each of you so much and the work that you do. You gave us tremendous amount of time today, and I can't thank you enough. I'm not sure if that would have happened in a COVID world and all working still from home, trying to wrangle each of you to get you to a hotel in DC for numerous hours probably wouldn't have happened. So maybe this is a silver lining to part of that dark cloud, but I look forward to our continued dialogue and working together. To all of our attendees from NACDD today, I hope that you enjoyed this opportunity to hear from some of my closest colleagues. You work with folks from their organizations at the state and local level all the time. I hope this will inspire you to do more, connect more, and look more at how you're operating in the state and territorial sphere and thinking about how we all come together to affect policy change. So thank you everybody for a great afternoon. Thank you again to my colleagues and to all of our NACDD attendees. We will see you again tomorrow afternoon, depending on your time zone, of course, but 2 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.